Hey guys, so I feel prompted to do this video on DNC 101 because I have a lot to say about it, and it covers a lot of the discussions we've had lately, and obviously it's a substitution for the original 101, and I think even that is very heavily implied in the way this is played out. So I was promised to do this video because I was listening to Jared Halverson's Unshaken morning channel, which I love. And something that he said, which is my strange act, right, in relation to later in this chapter, which immediately reminded me of the Phantom of the Opera, my strange duet. And it kind of led me into this. I consider those kind of promptings a little bit of like the living word, because it's playing out right now. And even that I will go into the nature of New Jupiter or New Jerusalem as it is depicted here in DNC 101 and why that is the case. But from the onset, so this reminds me also of, the saying that as long as there's 10 or XYZ good man, the Lord will not do his, he will spare the people. And then this then brings up the question of faith. What is faith? Is it just to continue to procedurally move and act? Or is it to do what you are being called to do and prompted to do? Now, this also goes into my quandary with the double language that we often use as Latter-day Saints, right? We associate calling to be like what the church issues you to do your calling, and that is what we attribute to that word. But in everyday life, your calling would be that which is placed in your heart. And it is my view that it is by the calling that it is placed in your heart, not only that gives you joy, but the mechanism by which you would be most likely to bring people on to Christ. And this is similar to my quandary with the temple, right? Because this is true and this is real. Like, this is absolutely true. So if it's already true, then we're doing a ritual about something that already is. But with that said, going right into DNC 101:7, which is, they were slow to hearken unto the voice of the Lord. Therefore, the Lord, their God, is slow to hearken unto their prayers, to answer them in the day of trouble. In that day of their peace, they esteem lightly my counsel, but in the day of their trouble, of necessity, they feel after me. So these two portions off the bat kind of go into my subject matter conversation, right? Because to be slow to hearken onto the voice of the Lord means that you are able to discern what the voice of the Lord is. Now, we are a church of revelation. We also know that Lucifer has jurisdiction of mind, and many argue of this world, right? So if we are a church of revelation and Lucifer has jurisdiction of the mind, that means that at some point we have to be able to discern the difference between Lucifer and Christ. This also goes into the esoteric mysteries, by which I say that when Latter-day Saints say that Lucifer and Jesus are brothers, in my view, it does not only mean that we are derivative of one God or one inception point or monotheistic. There is, and this will also go into the Phantom of the Opera and his role in the way he plays Lucifer, and parallel directly to the family proclamation in relation to the dichotomy between the Angel of Music and the Phantom of the Opera, and the quandary in the Phantom between Emmy Rossum or Christine, and then love in Raoul, I believe is his name, vis-a-vis the Angel of Music, which has jurisdiction of the mind. So, because in 8, it delineates very clearly that peace is the Lord. And so there's a divergence between that at this time, right? It is implied this is happening right now. I also want to disclose that one of the things that the missionaries told me early on, before I got baptized, was they didn't say, yeah, they did. They said that I could disregard the italicized preface on all of these chapters, because those are not actually words from Joseph Smith or the originating Doctrine Covenants. Those are interpretations issued by the church, and so I can consider them with a grain of salt. So I don't even read them at this point. So then going on to 9. It goes into how his bowels are filled with compassion and mercy, notwithstanding the sense, right? So again, here God is saying that there's a divergence. This also reminds me of 2 distinct chapters in D&C. One which talks about we have fallen astray, so to speak, per se, but our baptisms will still be honored. And it also kind of reminds me of the way D&C 46, I believe is 2-5, depicts about not kicking anybody out of the church, because these actually will become very directly correlated to my point in what I'm about to say regarding 101. So here it's saying your members, and you may have gone things wrong, but nonetheless, I will be merciful onto your good faith efforts, so to speak, right? Even in, I think, unbelief, which I think is implied, especially by the way I hear people talk about everything. And even the way people attribute or associate faith, which I fundamentally disagree with, right? Because members will say that faith is that you continue to be a member of the church or continue to hold on to a covenant path, even if you don't totally agree or you're not sure or you don't believe. Whereas I say faith presupposes 84:45, taking on the mantle of Christ, and even Nephi and everything that even here suggests that you are to see the face of God. The reason why is because at that point, faith then converts, so to speak, or translates to the idea that we are to move upon our calling and promptings in relation to what's happening into the world, which would have a very material effect and implication to everything that is going on in this chapter. And so this then, because then 11 goes into saying, my indignation is soon to be poured out when the world's cup of iniquity is full. And I think this again goes to my opening statement about the Lord will spare as long as there's 10 good people. Then the question is, what is good people? In my view, is people that are still willing to try. And the reason I say that actually relates to later in this chapter and the nature of New Jerusalem. Blah! The nature of New Jerusalem, where in this chapter, or rather, whenever I say that I had a very similar experience to Joseph Smith, once I saw kind of the 2 pillars of gold, not immediately after, but there was a point where I realized, this was during 2020, where if free will, as depicted in the Constitution, which I consider to be in the emanation of natural law, as well as the Declaration of Independence, which also is touched on in here that I will go into, and I'm not talking about the section of the Constitution, I'm talking about the way in which we are to protect that and let people who fall out of that be dealt with God one-on-one on the day of judgment, right? That is to say that you are not to take people's rights away because of your righteous indignation. That is to be left up to God, and you are to honor the Constitution beyond, the Patriot Act and equality and all of those things. So, but one of the things that I realized whenever I was running, or when I had that experience, is that if America is no longer a place where the free will tenet can be enacted, then the entire human experiment will cease there will no longer be a mechanism on earth for the human flourishment and experiment to be able to take place. And so the apocalypse, the end times, what have you, the system must reset. And I think Joseph Smith tried to be one of these good people during this time. And I think any one of us, and all of us rather, should be that in relation to this chapter. So I also want to delineate that in this chapter 2, it talks a lot about the delineation between the pure in heart. And even in the parable of the tower, The issue with the tower is that they fell asleep, which is my subject matter controversy in relation to the temple. Is not that the temple or the family proclamation are not true, is that in my view, they are, one, temple recommends in my view are divergent to D&C 46. But second is that they are in the wrong order if we are not for spiritualizing, because here it clearly delineates the heart and peace. And it also alludes to, in many instances, the saints being incorrect on many issues. And then in the twinkling of an eye, I also consider to be, so I similarly, like the saints, believe that the resurrection happens in flesh and bone. However, I diverge in believing that it is going to be a physical resurrection of those that have already passed, but rather, and this goes into my book of remembrance in the Mysteries of Melchizedek, where our soul DNA of our ancestors are already embedded within us. We can heal our ancestry within ourselves, right? And part of my challenge with the temple is that to externalize that by proxy will remove that power, that factual codex priesthood power, so to speak, right? Because now you are materializing it, right? And even in this chapter, it says over and over and over again, you are not to materialize these things. It is not in those words, but it does say, so in 33, it does go into the Lord God, or in the resurrection, the second coming of Christ, all of these things will be made known to the saints, right? And in the twinkling of an eye, which I construe to be an awakening today. And I also, part of my interest in why I'm Latter-day Saint and not something else is because I do believe in a physical second coming of Christ. I don't think it's going to play out in the way it is depicted, but there will be a materializing force that will bring forth all of these things. Nonetheless, the other big thing that I want to go on, because I want to go into the key points, because what you focus on matters, and I feel no need to redress everything else in between, because everyone else is already going to do those things. But in 53, the last line, it says, in the Watchman Tower parable, it says, and you have not built a tower and also set a watchman upon the tower and watched for my vineyard and not have fallen asleep, lest the enemy should come upon you, right? So it does talk about falling asleep. Again, there is the delineation in resurrection, falling asleep and awakened. You know, we are never told that Adam wakes up. And so in 63, it goes in again, I will show on to the wisdom concerning the will of the churches. So this is one where, again, this to me relates to all church denominations in relation to the proper understanding of New Jerusalem, New Spiritual Jupiter. The idea of the Constitution and the emanation of natural law is to be set forth, and that every nation, and we even see this now, right? On the subject of not even just immigration, but just the inversion that all of this has become with corporate personhood and all of that. But the idea that the world was supposed to gather here on a non-inverted basis is also depicted here. From Eastern, they should build up, again, establishing Zion. I already touched on that when I talked about New Jupiter or New Jerusalem and all those things and the Constitution. Now, as to the parable of the woman and the judge, right? This is the part where I feel the second coming becomes a lot more parable of the 10 virgins, because the strange act, it even draws in the sword, right? That they shall be taken by and at the fall of their own sword, which is turning natural law against the statute inversion that I think lives in today. But the juxtaposing nature of even Christ and how some people will construe him to be, they won't unbelievers are again cited in 90. So I will leave this video at that. Think about the strange act and discernment, especially as I construe the chapter to relate a lot to Lucifer. I think at the end, Lucifer gets more heavily involved and the plot gets a little lost when names are introduced. So I'm not going to go into that storehouse is also cited in there, which I also find it to be a blind spot. And any wrong doctrine will lead to a blind spot that will misdirect you from faith and lead to unbelief. So with that said, guys, all of my love your way.